Hi, Tom.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Hello.
Hello.
Trying to
Still
get our
getting
schedule
situated.
straight. How are you?
It's,
Doing good. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Hi, Fabi. Oh my gosh, Fabienne, you got a haircut. Oh,
Hello,
beautiful.
hello. Yes, it's not a special effect.
I don't know. I guess
What?
it's a compliment, but I've never seen you look more French.
Ah, merci beaucoup.
You don't want to be an American right now in France.
Tell me about it.
Oh, Tom. Let's lament one for a minute. I have to say, Frodo, I didn't get to tell you this, but I'm now on the university now has a Faculty Senate International Committee to set up international teaching. And I'm on that committee. I might be chairing it. What a bad time to be doing international work.
Well,
I,
not if you want to flee the country.
Yeah.
speaking as a
What
represent,
university?
I'm at Washington State here in the east on the
Okay.
West Coast, way up north. Where are you,
Yep.
Tom?
I am at I'm in the in Southeast Texas. I teach at Houston Community College
Oh my
at
gosh, I
Woodbury
got
Center.
my first master's at University of Houston.
Oh, okay. Well, my undergraduate is from University of Texas, and my graduate is from Georgetown.
That's
So,
great. I did my undergraduate at Stephen F. Austin, and then I did my first master's at University of Houston, and then I did my second master's and PhD at UT Dallas.
okay.
And I lived on the
Oh,
Gulf Coast for many years.
so you grew up here?
Oh yeah, I grew up on the Gulf Coast. My father was a fisherman out in the Chandler Islands.
Oh,
You know,
wow.
yeah,
So where did you what town did you live in?
Pearland, Texas, when
Oh,
I was a
Pearland.
kid,
Okay.
and
Yep.
then I lived in Houston as an adult, and then I
Okay.
moved to New Orleans to be close to my father, and then I moved to Dallas. So I
Okay,
was
which is a bit away from the water. Not as good at
too
fishing there.
too far away from the water. It was a 6.5 hour drive to Galveston, which was hard on me. I'm a saltwater girl.
Well, I grew up in Montrose, so
That's where I lived as an adult.
okay. Whereabouts?
I lived on West Main Street
Okay. Yeah, I
near
grew up on
Dunlavy.
yep, I grew up on one of the state streets. I grew up on Indiana, right off of
Oh, that's
Dunleavy there.
great. When I got out of college, I went to I lived in by Rice University, and I ran the
Yep.
Rice campus. Good morning, everybody. Hi, Carl. Hi, Peter. Good morning. All right. So, oh, there's Mark. The party can start. Hello, Mark. I'm gonna drop
Hi.
this. I'm gonna. I know we're not gonna start with this, but I'm gonna go ahead and drop this in the channel for everybody.
also for everyone's reference, that is indeed Fabienne.
Picture of Dorian
Looking
Gray
snap,
somewhere. Yes.
looking snappy.
I
Cool.
don't want to share too much, but it might come as a shock. It was Valentine's Day a couple of days ago, and then have to not look like a bear, basically.
Oh, so you celebrate Valentine's Day?
Kind
Okay,
of.
cool. That's cool.
Do you celebrate President's Day? I doubt it. It's what we have here now.
Oh, you celebrate
Not
it still?
today. Not
Well, I
today.
celebrate the fact that I'm not teaching this morning.
Oh yeah, of course. That's today. Yes. Former President's Day. Yeah, so Deanie is going to be presenting the next today, and that's going to be amazing. And it is a preview of the TED Talk version of it, which will be really cool for us to feedback both on the presentation and on the content. First, then, in our traditional style, Fabienne will have a few minutes to update us on what he's been doing with Sloan work. And while he's looking very confused and blinking his eyes and thinking hard, I just want to bring up, cool, a thought thing or a focus thing for everybody who wants to. In the work that Fabienne is racing ahead with and doing just brilliantly, there are some interactions we still haven't decided on. I won't bore you with which, but if this is a great time, if you want to write down some thoughts to, you're in the space, you're doing some work, even if it's just a paragraph, a sketch, or whatever it is, because very soon we need to come together and figure out how to do that. So it's similar to, yeah. Mark?
Very quick one. I'll find the URL, but it might be useful just to point up the page we started making of a few definitions, because if people have any suggestions to put in there, this is just trying to address the fact that, you know, when we say view, do we have any conception in our own minds of the same thing? Probably we don't. So it's just beginning to give us a bit of definition, at least as what we mean within the project. And it might help with discussions going forward. I'll find the URL and stick it in the sidebar. Thanks.
The URL is now, you're talking about the glossary.
Yeah.
When you go to our main website, by the way, Fabian, I'm just waffling on while you're getting ready. Please just interrupt me anytime. It's linked at the bottom of the first page. And in context of that, yes, we need to define some terms. But right now, I would say it's equally important to do the opposite of just having fun with ideas for interactions and then see where they fit. Okay, Fabian, you're clearly ready.
To clarify, the point is the two aren't in opposition. The whole idea.
Exactly.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's really important. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting. I didn't mean to.
So can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yep.
Can you see my screen being shared?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
You can see me from the headset point of view, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I need to go through the steps before I start to ramble, and then after 5 minutes, people tell me I'm not showing my screen. So
Of
thanks for
course.
that. So that's the usual environment where a couple of things change, basically. The first one, visually, the more obvious, is this green lines around, so that it doesn't feel like you're going to cut your hand with this short piece of paper. The second thing is the paper itself, which now has also figures. It's pretty important, but until now there wasn't. And the figure can also be picked. The hope also for those, like the kind of gutters to the side, is to move the entire document around. And also, for example, to be able to pinch and extend them or add columns or margins, a way to annotate, basically. It is not the case yet. It's more of a visual placeholder and a way to not, again, be afraid kind of the sharpness of it. So a little reminder from last week is now you can pluck some of those and release. The first one actually is when you pick something, your hand becomes then transparent, so that you can actually see what you're picking. And when you pick some of that text, it's going to follow the color that you picked. So if now I take keywords and I release, it's green. And you can see those highlights as a JSON right there, including the metadata of the color, because you might want different highlights.
Fabian, can I highlight how important that is? Do you mind?
Please do.
Right. It is. First of all, you may not have seen this, Tom. When Fabian, could you touch your left wrist? So when he touches that, all the commands in the space disappear. So that wrist touch is a major toggle. That's something that is non-obvious. Secondly, all the commands in space are, they're literally commands. So what he's managed to do now with the color, when you apply it, it's not dead, so to speak. It is applied as knowledge that is stored, as in the system now knows you've highlighted this color with this text, which as an interaction in a space where everything is vague and constructed is super amazing, plus very, very useful for what we're doing, because Dene and Fabian and I have been talking a lot about how authoring has to happen in a reading environment. They have to be combined. So this is a very powerful way to do that. So thank you. Thank you, Fabian.
Yeah. So yeah, also because remember that Peter asked last time, so yes, you can switch pages and they include the position of the document, the figures in the right position. You can move them around. I don't know if we'll want to snap back, but anyway, yes. And now the bigger change, let's say, from last week, it's also due to, I think I showed some of you on Slack, the kind of sketch. I'm not going to show you on the webcam in the headset, but I started to draw how to do this with some physical highlighters. which are now reproduced here. So the good thing with this way is that computationally it's precise. You get the thing, and also you get the actual data to save it, which you get the cheating out. By the way, I'll show it after. The downside of it is not free. So in the sense of you can just pick that part of the line or the line.
Fabien, can you try to move less? The frame rate is quite bad, obviously.
Yes, I will try to get less excited.
Be still, my friend.
So I'll go slowly because yeah, it's good that you give me such feedback because to me it's flawless. Like it is really smooth.
Fabien, can I ask you a question?
Please do.
Go back to the screen so I can see the whole thing again. You've got pictures. The images here are almost three-dimensional, right? They're like bas reliefs.
Yes.
Could I pick them up? Could I pick them off the paper and hold them in my hand? Yeah,
maybe.
good.
Yeah, like so.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Follow-up question. Even though this is a short session, Fabien, how much work would it be that if you pick up an image, it then loads a high-resolution version of that image?
I think it's really high res already. So.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
I don't think you'll get better than this.
Okay, no, that's cool. Thank you. Please go on,
Yeah.
and then we wrap, obviously.
Yes. So yeah, I'll make it quick. But the point is, this is, let's say, structured highlighting, and this is unstructured highlighting. So I pick the highlighter, and then I can just like circle around or do a mark, whatever I want. And I have just also to prove, let's say, I can have multiple colors the same way that the structured highlights here, you wouldn't associate semantic meaning for this. For example, maybe that's something important, maybe that's a mistake, maybe that's something you want to go back to. The same way for the free, let's say, highlighting, you might want to say, hey, this is something important, or this is what I consider something I want to double check because I'm not sure I trust this methodology, whatever you're into. One important point though is, again, this is completely free. So I'm basically drawing on a piece of paper that is behind the text. I don't know if you'll be able to see, but it's right behind there. You see a bit of depth. Which also means you can imagine it as a layer on top or above, but there is no information except the position on the page. So for example, if I do this, right now, I have no knowledge that I'm actually highlighting step 5. And I cannot now get, let's say, step 5 as like the text itself. It's two different things. Does it make sense?
Yeah, Fabien, question. When we were building these, we call them panels. We didn't call them books or documents. We call them panels. Mm-hmm. And we had the same kind of thing around the panel so that people could hold the panel in their hands, right?
Yeah.
You called it paper cuts this morning, but it's holding it in your hands. We also could stretch it and make it bigger. Can we do that with yours?
Not now. Now it's really just a placeholder. And it's kind of the question also I want to invite everybody to kind of ponder is indeed what is when we cannot, but if we were to pinch here, that thing, what do we actually do? Do we go to the previous page, next page? Do we extend the margins? This is up for grab, if you pardon the pen.
That's actually quite funny. Yeah, this is something everybody please think about this and write down your thoughts, because this is the kind of paragraph we would love to have in the book. I have very strong feelings about what should happen here. So let's not poison each other's imagination right now, but Fabien, that's a perfect question.
I think that's about it. I think that's what I wanted to
well, thank you, Fabien. Thank you very, very much. Any last questions for Fabien before we hand it over to the Pacific Northwest?
I like Tom's comment. How can we get away from the notion of paper? And I think that's what we've been talking about, Tom, is documents.
volumes
to kind of get away from that. But essentially, there's it's kind of like today we think of when I pull tissue, I still call it Kleenex. It's still Xeroxing. I mean, there's things that have become ingrained, even just in 50 years.
And you just said the key word. I mean, the reason we're stuck with the paper metaphor is because of Xerox and the fact that the park guys felt the need to adhere to that so that the brass and at Xerox would understand what the heck they were working on. And it kind of transferred on to Macintosh, Windows, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and onto the web. I mean, the web is a stack of papers.
Well, web pages, right? But I think, Tom, the other thing we talk about in my classes is that human beings can't imagine what they can't imagine. That we call it breadcrumbing. We have to breadcrumb things to them, take them step by step. And it takes a long time to get out of we still use the word scrolling, but we don't call this a scroll. So we've repurposed the word for something else, but it did change from scrolls to a leaf of paper, right? A leaf, right? A leaf of paper. So we have this desire to use things in the physical world to explain the things that we're trying to make people understand. It's just normal, right? I mean, even Aesop's Fables is all about teaching morality through, ants, grasshoppers, the things that you see every day. Just it's human nature. Anyway.
I'm going to put in my 50 cents worth inflation. I don't mind paper as being part of it because it is literally a framing device. But I do think we need flexibility beyond what we have now. And I would encourage all of you to very angrily write down how it should be different. Because one of the key things about academic communication, which is what we're trying to support here, is you have to be able to be cited. So it has to, at some level, be a thing. So if we frame it as a paper or as a volume, Rob's beautiful term, we don't actually know what that means yet, and we should be careful about over-defining too early. But to get towards knowing what we mean by more of a volume is going to be a big thing. Fabian, last comment, and then it's Dene time.
Yes, two quick things. Number one, it's a question for everyone. When I do such presentations, should I also show the code and explain a bit how it's done, or is it going a bit too deep? How do people feel about that?
I would like it if you put the code at a place I can link to when I upload the presentation afterwards, so people who are... Sorry, Deena, I talked over you. Sorry.
I love seeing the code.
Okay. Me too.
I love seeing the code.
I'll do that next time, not this time, so that we don't go over. But next time, yes, I'll definitely do that. Especially that I imagine people might have both curiosity about it, but also suggestions on how to do it. So yeah, okay, next time I'll do that. And the code will obviously, it's all open source. It obviously will be referenceable, linked, forkable, remixable, anything you want to do with it. So that's a given. The other thing, yes, like it looks like paper for at least two reasons. Number one is I got a PDF in because that's kind of the traditional publication format. We had endless discussion last year about this. I'm a web developer. I prefer the web. So it's kind of an easier way to get realistic content in. But it's definitely not neither the only way, not necessarily what we get to be stuck to. It's an easier path, let's say. Ironically enough, because it's been quite a pain to get to that point. And the other point is like, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but understandability. Like if I show you all something totally weird, maybe you don't get it and I can't explain it properly. So at least with those kind of like a pen or a highlighter that looks like a highlighter, I imagine that it sparks a bit more idea, including it's like, what is it, like Cunningham's law or something, like you put something on the internet that's wrong to provoke, let's say, thoughts. So please don't see pen and paper virtually as a way to, it's just a little technical way to start. Like please do go crazy with the suggestion, scratching, pulling, folding the paper in ways that are physically impossible. It is just like a technical way to say, hey, we can do this, we can get there. Now let's actually do something interesting with it.
Exactly. And with that, Dene.
Hello, everybody.
Hang on. Just say you all. Oh, yeah, we're all the same group. I'm sorry, I'm being ridiculous. I was going to say, if you want to try it, go to the website. It's always linked. Right, Dene, I will shush now. Sorry about that.
Okay, hi. All right, so most of you know that I have built a museum and library that's a virtual museum and library called the Next. And with the Next, we're the only place in the world that shows born digital objects, right? So we have the digital files for over 3,000 works, and we make them available when we can, right? If they're working. Some of the files, like shockwave works, don't function anymore, and so we can't show them, but we have them accessible, at least so people can see something about the work. So we put bibliographical metadata there for you. Let me do a screen share, and I can walk you through a little bit with this. So I'm going to go here. 1 second. So this is the Next. Everything is supposed to be kind of virtual. Things are floating in air. We're trying to reimagine what it's like to be a virtual space. This is a welcome space. We don't talk about web pages. Tom, we purposely went out of our way to talk about spaces because we don't see this as paper. There's no paper in the virtual world, right? With one of the principles that we talked about. And so you'll see here in the collections very quickly, there's categories that we've developed. And so if you go here to individual artists and scholars, you see that we have the Rob Whitted collection, right? And Rob Swigert collection. Here's Rob's work here. Here's a video. He welcomes you to the space. Talk a little bit about him. And then here are access to his works. If you go to something like here, this is one of the sound files that he donated, and you can download it, right? And you can also see citations. So we have all this digital work. It's 3,000 plus works that are there. But with these works came boxes, physical boxes of material. So when Rob sent us his digital files, he gave us the physical artifacts to go with it. So the question is, what do we do in a virtual world to show the physical objects? That became the problem to solve, right? So what we imagined was a visualization space. And so we began to model in 3D some of these more useful, interesting, odd, weird, cool projects, things that we were collecting in the boxes. I have 110 boxes now in my archival space. And we're treating them as, as any library would treat them. They're set up in archival boxes and archival files. There's finding aids and all these things that people need if they want to come and study with us at the lab. So here's one example. You can open up Shelley Jackson's Patchwork Girl just by visualizing it, and you can enter into the experience here. And then you'll notice that there's going to be a carousel at the bottom of the space with a lot of objects. So the first thing we were imagining was interacting with objects, letting people see them. You can't travel to Vancouver, Washington to get one of the only copies left of maybe Shelley Jackson's early work, right? This is 1995. You don't even have a computer that can read the floppy disk. But you can look here and get a sense of what it looked like. And I'm imagining in 10 and 15 years, there'll be hardly anyone left that remembers what a floppy disk is. When I teach my classes, I actually give my students a floppy disk and I have them tear it apart so they can see what it's like inside. They've never held one in their hands, right? And so if you go down here at the carousel, you'll see that there's other objects. So here's a visualization of the ball. This is the beach ball that Richard Holton used in his performances of Fergursky Finhorn acid. And I have both beach balls in my collection, right, in the Next. He also had Spam cans that he would perform with, because one of the characters in the story refers to spam. It's one of the artifacts, right? And here's a spam can. This is all 3D modeled by hand, right? If you go to this object, this is Rob Whittick's costume from his early work that he did in the 1980s on a BBS, on the bulletin boards. And so we have his overalls, and we have his hat that he wore, right? And we modeled this so that people can get a sense of it. So here are all these different things that we've made, right? The mask that we used during the pandemic for ELO conference. Now, it was interesting to build this for 3D, and we've had a lot of people interested in this. I've talked about this already at the British Library. I've given talks about this in Montreal, and so there's a lot of interest in what we're doing here. But the thing that I thought was missing was interaction, was actually immersion and interaction, right? So how do you immerse yourself in the experience so that you feel like there's not a separation between you and the object? So how do we break that separation? And that's by entering the space with the object. So if you have a headset and you have a VR headset, you can click on experience in VR, and you can then experience the work itself, right? You can feel what it's like to hold the beach ball, turn it in your hands, and so on and so forth. So this is the next step, right? And so this presentation of physical artifacts is not being done in this way anywhere. I know that I've spent a lot of time in the Apple store looking at what other people are doing with art in the virtual world. And it's mostly skeuomorphic experiences. I can go into an art gallery and see stuff on the wall, but there's nothing that allows a user to interact with an object, which I find really interesting, considering there's so many cool things that libraries are holding. So that said, I'm going to stop share now. I was invited to give a TED Talk, and it takes place on March 7th. And so I gave you a copy of my text that I'm reading, and I'd like to just share that with you and kind of talk through it a little bit with you. So I dropped it into the channel for you if you want to bring that up, rather than be screen share, because I actually like to see your faces. But I start off with this idea of years ago when I was studying ancient Greek. I went to Greece and Turkey for 6 weeks, and I spent quite a bit of time in Athens, and then I traveled all around like people would do. Then I took the boat to Marmaris and traveled up to Ephesus and on to Istanbul. And but while I was standing in the National Museum looking at these pots, and I was just amazed how beautiful they were. There were so many of them. But standing there, I couldn't touch them. I couldn't get anywhere near them, right? There's a glass separating me from the object. And I couldn't even see the writing on them. And a lot of these pots have little bits of writing, right? I couldn't get close enough to see where the cracks were, which tells me a lot about how the pots have been handled through the thousands of years. But I could look at them and see them, and this image just captures it perfectly. And they're all in the same space, right? So I'm it's like being in the grocery store, looking at 60 boxes of cereal, trying to pick the one you want, right? And I'm looking at these and trying to get a sense of them. And then you could see in that image, the writing is in front of them, little tiny bit of writing, right? And you're trying to match the pot to the number, to the letter, right? And it was so frustrating. So frustrating. And I wanted to do something different. And so here we are in the next with all these great objects, things that artists have given us and have made by hand. And, I want to make them available to the public for free, 24/7, accessible, in open source technology. So the Sloan Foundation, just learning how to use WebXR was pivotal in this, because we're not using anything in the lab that is proprietary. We're trying to make things last a long, long time. So we're using computer-based languages, web-based languages. We're trying to stay away from Unity and Unreal Engine. So the Sloan Foundation grant taught us how to build in WebXR. And so we were able to begin to visualize those 3D objects, not just in the web environment where you're moving your hands around and with the cursor, but actually experience that space, right? And so it started with the pots, this whole desire to make things available. I was impressed. I mean, think about it. These pots are thousands of years old and they still exist. And they're so well taken care of, right? There's no dust on them. They're managed. And so this is how I'm imagining archival work to be, making things last. But there's a step that's missing, and that is making them available, right? Making them really, really available so that I can experience them in the way they meant to be experienced. Pots are meant to be picked up and touched and used, right? But having them in a space where they're art objects, where I can't even get near them, is so weird. So anyway, so I began, going through this process with the Next, building the 3D models, putting them on the web, letting people interact, and then going into this VR experience. And as I say in my talk, immersion is the way to go, because the word immersion comes from the notion of being submerged. And you're submerged inside of something with the object itself, and the object is no longer separated from you. And so Rob will probably agree with me that this idea of this platonic notion of separation between me and the other, what we can do in the virtual world is break that down. We can stop that separation and bring it to us, so it's not separate from us in a way that we necessarily can't do that with these objects in a real museum, right? In a physical museum. And so some of the objects I talk about, I'm going to talk about two. And if you want to look at Uncle Buddy's Phantom Funhouse, that's a box. When it came in a box, it was black. We called it the chocolate box of death. You open it up and there's all these objects inside of it that you have to experience in order to solve the mystery of who Uncle Buddy is and what the hell happened to him because he disappeared. So there's all these there's 2 musical cassettes, 5 floppy disks. There's a letter from the editor of Vortex magazine. There's a short story that that Uncle Buddy sent to Vortex, right? And the marked up copy by the editor for changes. And so you experience these objects and you can solve the mystery of Uncle Buddy and you can figure out what happened to him. The other object I'm talking about at the TED Talk is the pinwheel that Deena Larsen made. And the pinwheel is this beautiful little object. She handmade this pinwheel and wrote a poem on each of the blade, a line of poetry on each of the blade. And as you blew the pinwheel or moved it like this through space, you would see the poem moving. And what she did when she made that it was meant to be a teaching tool to teach people what interactive poetry was all about. And if you go back to 1998, not many people had access to the internet or to computers. And so she was having to teach novices or people with absolutely no experience what an interactive poem was. And she did that through this physical thing called the pinwheel. And I have 2 of them she made in the Next. And so we have that modeled for visitors. And then I think about, in the last part of my talk, I mentioned, I think about the advantages of using VR for experiencing artifacts in a museum. And as I mentioned, I went and looked for a long time to see what other people are doing. And yeah, there's the Louvre. You can go and get for $9.99, an app for the Louvre. You can go here and see. You can do the Van Gogh exhibit, the virtual exhibit, right? There's that one. A lot of them are free. Some are $2.99, right? But every one of them is skeuomorphic. None of them allows you to touch anything. And the question I ask myself is, you're in a fucking virtual environment. You're not going to hurt the Picasso by touching it. You can actually touch that Picasso and actually hold it in your hand and tear it apart. We're not doing that. They're not doing that in the virtual space. And I just find that so bizarre. And so what I'm planning to do with this project is to make it available in the Apple Store so that people can actually experience these objects in the Next, so that they can be able to see what it's like to touch these things and get to know them better. It's only, and if you think about it, if I were teaching kids today and I was showing them Greek pots, I couldn't take them to Athens, but I certainly could put a headset on them and have them handle the pots in the classroom, right? That would be a great teaching tool. I also mentioned in my talk that it's a shame that museums aren't doing this because kids are playing Beat Saber and Pokemon Go, and they're used to donning a headset and doing things. They expect that. And for museums not to be offering that doesn't make sense to me because that's a new audience, right? The lamenting of all the gray hair people in museums. We could solve this problem easily by thinking about what young people want to experience. What I really would love to end my talk with is to be standing there at the end and be able to actually hold that pot in my hand, right? Take it out of the glass and hold it. So what I'm having Holly, my artist, do in my lab is create that same pot, picture the pots, and superimpose a picture of me in front of it, holding one of them, so that I can end with that idea. But anyway, so that's what I'm talking about at the TED Talk, and I have to memorize this entire script before March 7th. Andrew Thompson's going with me. He's going to be wearing the headset. So the first couple of things I'm talking about use slides, and then the headset comes on and he starts to manipulate those objects in broadcasting it on the big screen. And then I go back to the final slide, which is the pots. And that's the presentation. Fabian, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much. Makes complete sense. And indeed, the last point specifically that was my wondering how you would present it, like not in front of a virtual audience like us, but there. And I think indeed being able to, it would be strange if you were to talk about the deep guttural need of manipulating it and that not do it, just like click, click, click. That would be so weird. And for the anecdote, also, it happened to me. Maybe I mentioned it here in this group. Like I went to a Da Vinci museum, and it's full of his invention. And they were not the originals. They were obviously they're handcraft, but still, you can't touch them. It was driving me nuts. It's like, how can you? Terrible.
I know,
anyway,
it doesn't make any sense.
Yes, it's very, and it really, from just a point of learning, I'm still frustrated by this. Anyway, for an actual question rather, is like right now there are galleries of 3D objects that exist, like Ikaza, which is Ikosa. It's pretty nice, but here it looks like you have more than quote unquote just the 3D object. You have also the ways to interact with it. For example, the book and the booklet and the floppy disk, it can be open a certain way. And you cannot go further, for example, than 180. So there are decisions they're made. So I'm wondering if I follow this idea of, let's say, wanting to put the vase outside of the thing, and I want to include it in our work also, for example, for Sloan. Can we do this? How can we do this? What are the
I'm
ways?
so glad you asked that question. I've come up with a set of principles. So this is what I've been working on for quite a while, right? Setting up principles for the virtual world, because there's principles for the physical world that Aristotle and Plato and others have developed. But it seems to me that if something is born virtual, it's something like something we're building in a VR space, it's born there, right? Then it doesn't follow any of the rules of the physical world at all. They don't have to. They're born virtual. If they're physical objects that exist in the present world, meant to be artifacts, and we're showing them like I'm doing in the next, then they should function in the way that they function in their physical world, right? So if it's a book, it functions like a book, right? The physical object is a book. It should function like a book. And this is what's making Andrew go crazy, Fabienne, because it's so easy for him just to build a code and drop in the objects. I'm not letting him do that. Every object in WebXR has their own functionality based on their physical aspect. So the folios open like a book. So that's an easy one. But the beach ball is meant to be thrown. When Holton would perform for Gursky, he would it would be in front of a crowd of people like a rock concert, right? It's like rock concerts back in the 90s and 2000s. He would throw the beach ball out and somebody would catch it. And they would read the writing on the spine of it, the ridge of it. And then he would perform that piece of the hypertext, then they would toss it to someone in the crowd and they would read a piece. So it was meant to be, it was physically meant to be tossed. So guess what? The beach ball in the next will be tossable, right? And so that makes sense. So he has to redo the code so that we can have it do that functionality. So just to finish this thought, Frodo, and then I'll take your question. I'm following Aristotelian principles of what we call of what objects are, right? The material aspect of them, the formal aspect of them, the efficient aspect of them, and the final causes of them. There's 4 different properties of an object that he talks about. And so in keeping with that, the material aspect is, what is it made of? So we're looking at what something's made of. So going back to the beach ball, it's made of plastic. So one of the things that our stretch goals to do before March 7th is have the sound of your hands on that beach ball make that squeaky plastic sound, which is cool, right? It's interactive, but more importantly, it's true to the object. It follows Aristotelian principles. The formal aspect is what kind of thing is it? What does it do? And it's a ball, so we throw it, right? How is it made? It's round. And so I'm having that beach ball that's currently in the next that you're looking at. We're redoing the whole thing. I have a brand new 3D modeler who's very, very good. And he's even putting the puckers. So if you know what a beach ball does, if you don't blow it up entirely, it has a little bit of give. So it's not going to be that shiny, tight thing. It's going to have a little bit of the pucker because it's not fully aired up. And then the final cause, the final property is what it's used for and what it possibly could be used for. What are the potentials of this object, right? And it's a ball that can bounce and can be thrown. So I think just following those principles, Fabienne. And then of course, then we have the third type, and that is a physical object that it maybe exists in this world, like paper, but we're trying to do something different in the born digital world. And that's where the fun part really starts, right? How do you reconceive something that's physical for that world? And that's what we're doing with our project. And that's why, having the handles on that document, when we did the Rob Swigert portal project, we had the similar grasping object on the sides. We also were able to manipulate it and open it up and close it and make it different sizes, so sizable, and then move it out of the way, put them side by side. So that's something that exists in the real world, but we're trying to reconceive it. So there's 3 different types that I've imagined currently for these spaces. Rhoda?
So amazing. Writing some notes for myself to ask you here. So we were lucky enough to see Caravaggio in Malta in the church where it was made to be. And so that brings up 2 questions regarding what you're doing. One of them is, do you consider the environment that these objects are interacted with? I would expect most of them to be not for one environment, but I could also imagine that your lab would be a fantastic place to literally pick them up. So that's part A of my questions. Do you consider the environment?
I think it's specific for its use. For example, when I'm looking at the VR environments for the museums that are online currently, if it's the Louvre and they're looking at objects in the Louvre, of course that environment needs to be the Louvre, right? So there's a connection between that. If it's a born virtual object, born in the virtual environment, then it's up for grabs. We can make whatever we want, which is what we're struggling with in our project. I mean, that's the struggle. We don't have to follow skeuomorphic. We don't have to have me sitting in this space that you're seeing right now, which is my home lab, and be in this space in order to interact with virtual objects. We can leave this. And frankly, I do want to leave it. I'm finding myself wanting to leave the physical world more and more every day.
So part B and C of that, because I see Fabienne has something. B is sound. I've noticed I have misophonia, so I'm quite specific with sounds, but Some concerts are recorded so well now, my head goes into the screen. Some other concerts, you can hear a little bit of background sound. It's absolutely horrific, right? So I could imagine for, just to use the example Caravaggio again, the background din, the ambient sound of that church may very well be good. You made me think of this when you talked about the sound of the actual ball, which is fantastic. So then you've already nodded to that. So I'll finish with C, which is the game Crisis, which is a big open world thing, inspired a lot of my work. One of the key things is the metadata there. And of course, that's something that we are very much aligned on. I can imagine for fun, having the ball you're talking about, having different levels of inflation, having different attributes because of that. Now, finally, what I've
Yeah, I
really...
mean, can I respond to that? Let me,
Of course.
before you go past that. This is what is also driving Andrew crazy, is that I'm asking him to, and this is what we talked about with Fabienne. The code contains metadata, right? The code is metadata in some cases. And in the work that we're doing with the balls and the folios and all these different objects in the next, the way in which he's coding that and the behaviors becomes metadata. And he can emphasize the metadata in the code itself, right? So it becomes embedded, which I think is really important.
It is super important, and it's one of the 3 pillars of the work we're doing for Sloan. One thing I would really like, Dene, is once some of these objects are done to the standard you're happy with, if we can try to put them in what we're doing here. I mean, how amazing would it be to go to an exhibition and have a beach ball or whatever, be able to copy it, write an academic document, and have not just the basic 3D model, but all those attributes embedded so that, depending on the viewing situation, these attributes are used or not, but that's not your problem. You're just making it available. It would be amazing.
Yeah, and the other thing is that we're putting everything in GitHub. So the idea is it's open source. Not only is it open source, but it's meant to be stolen. We want people to do this. We want people to use our code and to think about how to better show artifacts. I mean, that's part of the lab's mission, right? Fabienne?
Thank you, Dene.
It's going to be a bit more on the technical side, so that you can annoy Andrew even more. Is that I put a couple of links on the chat that there is. So the file format you're using, as far as I can tell, is called GLTF, which is a classic to send 3D models via the web and honestly anywhere. But there is, as most file formats, there are extensions. So where you can do initially more than what was designed, because it's a lot of back and forth and discussion of different partners and all. And extensions, they will kind of like escape valve, escape hatch, say, hey, we can't predict everything. So beyond the standard, there is this. So I'm wondering at some point if that could be, let's say, brought to the GLTF specification process. And one very pragmatic, that's complex, but I think it's worth it, especially because I believe you think really long term. So I think that's probably at least a worthwhile endeavor to try. Might be frustrating, might not be worth it, but at least knocking on the door, I think is worth it. And on a much simpler or pragmatic example, there is the A-frame GLTF Model Plus, which is basically trying to extend GLTF with like weird stuff, or at least stuff that wasn't designed for initially. So I think that I know the guy who is working on it, nice Frenchman. So he can also give us a presentation on that specific example and might give you also some like very pragmatic clue on how to do this. The good thing with his solution or this way is you, even if nobody cares, even if nobody likes the idea, you can still do it your way. If others do it, agree, they can also do it. And if, for example, there is momentum, maybe other museums who want to say, that's a good idea, I don't want to just have the file, but also ways to interact with it that can optionally be read by others, use them, then they would join this kind of thing. So there are ways to do this, and it's not just the code, let's say, it's within the file itself on top of the 3D model. So that those could be ways.
Thank you for that. Yeah, because I was sitting last week. Our 3D modeler comes in on Wednesdays at 4 o'clock and works with Andrew for 2 hours. And his name is also Andrew, so it's Andrew Square. We call him Andrew Square. And so I sit with them and watch them work, right? And watch them embed Andrew Truax's 3D models into Andrew Thompson's code. And so it'd be good to have them both involved in this, Fabienne. I'm not the technical aspect. I'm the theoretical idea person behind all this. But I like looking at the code. When I saw the code and I saw what he was doing, I realized that that was where the metadata could be. And these four different aspects, these four properties of Aristotle could be embedded in that. There's a lot of questions I want to come back to in a little bit in the chat. So I'll put a pin there, but I want to go to Tom.
Yeah, I may actually be asking one of the questions that I put in the chat, but you were talking about environments a minute ago. And yes, the physical environment is definitely interesting, and the contextual aspects of that are something that you absolutely should explore. But I'm interested in the ideation environment. I mean, when you see, if you were to see an artifact, say a painting by Picasso, and then have an AR map or of some sort that connects you back to this painting was influenced by this, or he was working with this person at this point, or this writer influenced him, or whatever. These kind of intellectual explorations that give you a much deeper understanding of the artifact based on what we know about it and what people have written about it. Also, that connection may come through a scholarly article or something like that where they've analyzed the painting, and even though Picasso may never have said this, and oh well, we think he did this and this and this and this. Has there been any thought about that kind of environment, that context of connections of ideations?
That's such a great question. Years ago, I used to teach art history and art appreciation courses.
Hmm.
And so I was doing a lot of traveling. I'd go to France and different places and look at art. And one of the things you learn when you're learning art history is that, for example, when you look at some of the post-impressionist work or even the impressionist work, there's this kind of yellow glaze in the atmosphere, right? That doesn't exist in Texas, right? I mean, in Texas, atmosphere is a bright, glaring experience. And so when you look at this art in a museum, whether it's New York City or Houston, Texas, there's this kind of wash of yellow across the screen, across the canvas. And I never understood it until I went to southern France.
Hmm.
And there it was. That was their atmosphere.
Hmm.
So if I were to teach, let's say Cézanne, for example, I would have in a virtual space, I would have the atmosphere be that atmosphere. I would show that yellow, that fine yellow tint that's in the air, and have the photo, have the image, the painting next to it, so you could see it.
Hmm.
Because that context is so important because it's so prevalent in the art. It's so prevalent. But unless here in the Pacific Northwest, it's gray. The big joke here is the state colors are gray and grayer. So the atmosphere is gray,
Yeah.
which I really, really like. So someone like when I teach in my classes and I show a piece of art, my students have no context for this. They have no idea what a glaring Galveston day is,
Hmm.
much less a beautiful kind of yellow tinted southern France, Arles, France, what that is. They have no context and they don't travel. Portland is far for them.
Yeah.
So I
But I'm
think,
also,
yes,
and
yeah, you can't.
not just the atmospheric aspect of it, but again, I'm really interested. To me, one of the most fascinating things, and I'm a photographer, but so I haven't, and a recovering musician. So I mean, I have this idea of all of these entrails of ideas that what I'm stealing from when I do my photography, and who I'm looking at, and those sorts of things. And I love stories of creative journeys. You want to hook me on a documentary, show me the Frank Zappa documentary that shows all of the connections with he listened to this and he was doing this at this time and that sort of thing, because I want to understand that process in myself as a creator. But the idea that you can have a much deeper understanding of an artifact, an art object, whatever it is, uh, by that context, not just the light, and that's an important part of it. Don't get me wrong, but also I want to know what intellectual influences with this coming from? Oh, I had never thought this guy has, read this or was, into this. And it may not have anything to do with the major art form that we're talking about. I mean, Picasso read books too, and you don't know how they influence him. And I'm really interested in that. Or, or the environment, the, psychological environment that he grew up in. All of these things influence his art. And so, that context of any artifact or even an ancient artifact like a pot from 2000 years ago, what are the civilizational connections? What do we know? What do we not know? Where are the gaps? Those kind of maps of information. I think that would be a really neat way to integrate the two layers. But and I mentioned before, an AR experience to do this sort of thing is you have walking through a gallery and you can immediately see, oh, there's a similar item at this other museum that's, over here or something like that as well. So
I want to respond to that, and then we'll go to
yeah,
Froda and
yeah,
Fabienne. Before the pandemic, I was commissioned to create a virtual environment for a local museum, the Museum of the Oregon Territory, or MOOT as we call it. And they had just gotten a gigantic donation from the Kagi Pharmacy family. The Kagi Pharmacy had been around since the 1800s. The two brothers founded a series of pharmacies around the Pacific Northwest, and the most important one was located in the Portland area. And it was a typical late 1800, early 1900 pharmacy with all the jars of drugs and the measuring things in the counter. I mean, it was really cool. And they got every drug. So they had been given drugs from the early 1900s, 1906 to be precise. And every drug was in these cute little boxes. I mean, they're darling boxes and gorgeous bottles full of opium and heroin and things that are like super dangerous. But they got all this, I mean, thousands of these things, and they wanted to put it on display. They just got the whole pharmacy given to them. And they wanted to put it on display for the public. But of course, the folks in the federal government and the state government said, no, that's hazardous waste and you can't show the drugs. So what they were able to do was put all the drugs into the shelving. They put everything in that whole pharmacy into the museum. They put the drugs into the shelving, but they put thick glass like this. And it was all air controlled so that none of the fumes could, get to us. So we wouldn't be like stoned out of our minds. But they wanted people to experience the pharmacy as if it had been, 1910. So they hired us, my program, to build it, and we did. And so we were able to build a VR environment so that you were sitting at the pharmacy desk, right, that they were given, and measure. You get the phone would ring, and it was an old-fashioned phone, and a voice, you'd pick it up, and the voice would say, hi, this is Dr. So-and-so, and I have a prescription for you. And so you would get the prescription, right, over the phone, you write it down, right, and then you'd start to put this, you take the drug and put it into the scale, and it was to scale physically, physics were correct. Then you would take it and put it in the mortar, and you're able to break it up, and then you put it into the jar, put the cap on it, and set it off to the side. And so we were able to do that. We also, with using AR, were able to let people use their cameras to look at the little box of ladies, menstrual cycle, lady problems, and read the box. And it would say like 100% opium. It's like, this will make you feel better. No more pain.
Now the VR trip would be what did that opium trip actually feel like?
Yeah. But I mean, we did exactly what you're saying. We built the environment. And so you're sitting in the pharmacy that had been transported to the museum, interacting as if you're the pharmacist.
Yeah.
It was so cool. And it ran there for 4 years. I think it went down in 2002. But yeah, it was really cool. And we got a giant grant.
So long ago.
From the IMLS folks. So the students were paid. It came out of my class. We built it for them. Anyway, Rhoda, your hand.
I'm having such happy feelings about this right now. This is just amazing. So a dream, and Fabienne, you're sitting down, so that's good.
Hello. Hello.
Hi.
Imagine how incredible it would be if we do our annotated bibliography for Sloan from the next as part of it. Imagine someone going in to the next, picking an object, and through some action, copying its attributes, going into what we're building, pasting it. And some of the attributes are used, all of them are stored, so that in the future, if that person goes into another amazing online gallery that the next software has provided but isn't the same, they can actually fully experience that object. That would be amazing. And as a part B, again, image maps were amazing back in the day. Imagine if what you're talking about here, we could have 3D image maps, maybe with the spatial coordinates. So when you share these items, you are sharing them in a very specific manner or highlighting a very specific aspect of it. It is really, really exciting, Dene, the way that you are sticking to the physical with the dream of going entirely to the virtual. So yeah, it's just amazing. Thank you.
What would I think would be more, so the next wouldn't be a good place for the next for the project, but what would be the next step, Frode, is to build the first virtual library for academic papers. That has not happened. And I've been to the Rubenstein at Duke, the Harvey, the Ransom at UT Austin. I mean, I've been to some of the finer, libraries in the country. Library of Congress, I did an exhibition there. The British Library is fantastic, but no one's doing it. No one's able to do it, right? And I think that could be a really interesting project. Fabienne?
Yes, I'm wondering to go back a bit, like imagining south of France or the context basically for a piece. Well, first, technically, I think it's also related, let's say, to GLTF and extension. You consider not the behavior of it, but the context could be like through AR and filters, could be, like, again, the technical, how it would work doesn't matter so much as considering like the piece and then other things on top, like interaction, like the context, but just like a very simple way that I think some of you experience is, for example, the Apple Vision Pro something dinosaurs. You don't
Yes.
see the dinosaurs, you see them like on rocks, and they're kind of, if you're lucky, they're like through the wall, but you still see the thing. So it's kind of it is some kind of context, and I think I also imagine some artists would not want their work to be, for example, on my wall, because they want a specific kind of wall. There are rules of installation, you cannot just put it there, and I'm wondering if that's also the kind of thing that could be done in some way, and if not, for example, then you have like a 3D model of what the background should be, if it cannot be somehow blended in with your environment. And I think, for example, if you have AR, because sometimes you might want, I don't know, you have notes about it and you want to put next to or behind the item. So I think also like a partial context or full context and rule of interaction within that context could be embedded in there. And yeah, for example, like partial experience, like non-immersive experience, like the dinosaur thing. They're kind of, I think, interesting way to consider it.
Fabienne, it's interesting because I was talking to Frode this morning. I'm playing, as most of you know, I'm in VR playing boxing now, along with my Beat Saber. And Supernatural is really cool because there's an oval on the floor that's like a little portal, right? You're standing on. And we're moving. We're kickboxing. I'm kickboxing and moving. So it's not a seated experience. You're actually physically moving. And these fists come at you that look like balls, and you're hitting them. And you get these bars coming. You're having to loop down and do this kind of stuff. What's part of this environment is the 360 experience, right? Because balls are coming at you from almost 100, 270 degree in some cases. But it's like you're standing on this podium at the Mojave Desert. Okay, now the next song you're in Iceland at a fjord. Okay, now I'm in I'm somewhere in southern France, right? I'm at a beach in Hawaii. And it's absolutely beautiful. It's just a still image. There's nothing flying overhead and nothing to take your eyes off the fist. And I find that interesting, right? I can feel like I'm traveling while I'm playing. But the problem with it is that I want to look at this environment, and I can't look at it and hit the balls at the same time, right? So I'm either going to do this and take in the beautiful environment, or I'm going to box, in this beautiful environment that I'm not really paying much attention to. And once you start the environment, once it comes online, the balls start. You only have like 2 or 3 seconds to take it in. And then when it ends, it ends. So it seems like a total waste of time, but at the same time, there's something cool about it, if that makes any sense. So they're trying to give us an environment to contextualize. I'm standing grounded on this oval. So I know not to get past that oval, right? So I don't fall over and hurt myself. Carl, you have your hand up.
I just had a couple of questions for the PIs. So there was a comment made in passing some point earlier today that we are actively avoiding the two major game engines, and I wanted to know like what the rationale for that was.
I can answer that from my lab, and we can answer it from the project. From the lab, we're trying to build things that are going to last. And so proprietary software like Unity and Unreal Engine. My experience with digital archiving and preservation is that stuff doesn't last, right? Story space, hard to get old story space to work anymore. HyperCard is dead. Flash is dead. Shockwave is dead. And Flash, we didn't think it was going to die. And Adobe killed it. And now my lab is spending a lot of money saving it through using Ruffle and Conifer. I just wrote a grant to save 78 Shockwave works, but I can only save them through video recording. I can't save the files. So I don't want to work with the damn thing that's going to cause somebody in 20 years not to access it. Now, my friends at Unreal, because I'm a partner with, my program's a partner with Unreal, so an Epic, they tell me that this stuff's going to last, but so did Adobe. So I don't trust these companies, Carl, and frown all you want, but good digital archival practices for preservation is you stay away from proprietary software, and we're using open web languages.
I mean,
And
the difference
Photoshop.
between those two would be that Flash was a proprietary file type and Unreal is coded in C++. And if
Yeah.
C++ goes away, half the software on the internet goes away.
Well, I also learned Pascal, Fortran. I mean, I learned a lot of early programs back in the 70s, right? I mean, how many of them are running around anymore?
You can still find Fortran on a bunch of modern projects. You can still find
Yeah,
COBOL in a couple of places, honestly.
COBOL a couple of places. I mean, I also used when I was building the Next originally, I was using what was it? Red Hat, not Red Hat. I was using a database software program that people were using at the time, but then it fell out of favor, and we couldn't find anybody to program it anymore.
So, Carl, I have a slightly different answer to that. I agree with every single word Dene said. But in addition to that, I really don't care in the sense that some of the software is okay if it's entirely proprietary and owned, because in a sense, it's just the display mechanism at the time if we do the data and metadata rights, something I know everybody here agrees with very much. And that brings me up for the reason I had my hand up, and this is we've talked in the community for quite a while of the notion of using icons in this context. And to clarify, obviously everybody knows what an icon is, but in the sense that on a desktop, even if you don't have the software, you can move an icon around anywhere on your desktop, right? So how you embed and what you show, the difference between those two things is really, really important. I would be so incredibly excited if you really could do what I said earlier, go into the next, copy something, go into what Fabienne has built, pasted it. Even if just the basics are shown, that's enough, right? It will be just insane. But if all the data is there, let's say in 20 years, someone has built an incredible physics engine that the beach ball can really thrive in, and that document is open, that would be amazing.
Let me
So,
also mention to you, Carl, when I was working with Steve Gibson, we were building interactive performances using Shockwave. We didn't build it in Shockwave necessarily in the drag and drop. We were building it in Lingo. So we had a Lingo programmer. Well, guess what? It still doesn't work, right? It's still dead tech, even though it's built in a language. It's a programming language. It still exists. Lingo still exists, but it's not readable. It doesn't, we can't recreate our project in Lingo. So I get what you're saying. I totally, yes, see, languages, absolutely. But I also know that there was a big difference when Unity jumped up to 5, right? It made a big difference in our projects. Things that we were building in 3 were different in 5. And we had to recode everything. I don't want to fucking recode things over and over again. And I'm going to say this one last thing is that when I built my first website in HTML, it was in 1995. That stuff is still readable exactly like I coded it. So HTML5, CSS, JavaScript, video are really the best technologies to use right now for anything that we're building in the media environments. So that's where our lab is putting its energy, and other preservation labs that do any kind of digital preservation at all are the same way, right? We're all doing it the same way because it lasts. Yeah, Fabienne?
So in terms of preservation, it's not my expertise, but I mentioned it before, and I'll put it back in the chat. It's the No Time to Wait conference. Initially, it was solely about video format, pretty much. The next one will be in Dublin in October, but it's a museum and beyond that try to say, hey, we have content, and now we have content that comes from photos and videos, and we have scans of all that. So how do we actually preserve it? The trend, again, I don't want to misrepresent the opinions of participants to this kind of conference, but my understanding is that typically, first, the more open it is, the safer it is. So you basically want no black box at any point of the pipeline. And ideally, it is file formats and file formats that are also fully open, that there is no, no patent of any kind, nothing basically that is going to make, for example, forcing to reverse engineering, then to have lawyer problem, this kind of thing. It's you want to avoid all this. And basically, the less intelligence there is, the plainer it is, the safer it is. That's kind of the trend of my understanding of this kind of conferences. But again, I invite people, regardless of their decision and technical choices, to go to the conference itself. It's fascinating. I think it's important because indeed, like, we build a ton of stuff. How do we preserve it? What's the way
Where's
to
the conference? Where's the conference?
No Time to Wait.
Where's the conference, Fabienne?
In Dublin next time. It changes every year, but the next one is in Dublin in October. Yes, and honestly, also to be pragmatic, I don't know if the web will keep on existing. I sure heck hope so. Browsers are super complicated. Some browsers, including WebExcel ones, are open source. Some are not. It's still a challenge, and again, that's why this kind of conference is important. So yeah, leave it at that.
Fabian, just briefly on that, please. Yes, we should all go. I want to go. I mean, Dene and I met each other the first time in Ireland, so that's kind of a nice thing. But in terms of the whole issue of simpler and simpler, that is also my experience with playing with metadata and the LLMs right now. Make it so that some kind of a system can extract it. And that's why the icon approach proposed by Chris Guttridge makes so much sense. Have a minimum information that everybody can see, put all kinds of goodies in there for other interactions. Thank you for your patience.
Let me mention something else. We got tonight, I have David Kolb coming in. He was the creator, as mentioned before, of Socrates and the Labyrinth, which is one of 2 hypertext philosophy essays ever done. And he's a terrific philosopher. He's got stage 4 Parkinson disease. He's in his mid-80s, and his wife's driving him in tonight for dinner. And then tomorrow he's working with the entire lab. And Carl, this pertains to what we're talking about. He created a work called Hypertext Resistance in HTML, but he used some weird things at the time that we're having to like clean up today. So, it wasn't all straight HTML, right? And in Deena Larsen's work, she loved Java applets and iframes. I mean, she just couldn't, there was an iframe she didn't love. So having to take things out of her work and redo it to make all her little kanji kus work, 17 kanji kus work. This is the problem we're facing in the lab, is these really cool functionalities that are made by, and even something like a carousel, using Glide as a carousel. You know, we're careful about what plugins we're using, because some of them don't work well anymore. I mean, Scroller doesn't work anymore, for example. Mark?
Yeah, I was just musing on the fact we're mentioning how these richer experiences are underpinned by the information we have around them, stepping around the side of the D word. But a reflection I have from sort of decades of teaching basically knowledge exploration tools is the constant, it's always getting people to the point of epiphany when they realize that they make the data about the discoveries they're making, that there isn't a magic thing behind the curtain that does this abstraction for them. And so in a sense, one of the challenges for us as well is how do we pivot our tools and our practice so that we are actually making, capturing this data, rather than as is the case at the moment, where that's normally handed off. And because of the way in a way, software is a bit like, I think, machines in the 1800s. If you bought a machine, it came with a mechanic. If it didn't have a mechanic, it would work for a day and either stop working or maybe blow up and kill everybody. But so it was a whole train thing on one side, and so certain coding is a real skill and requires that training. So we put it to one side, and so most of the rest of us think that because data tends to be stored in a digital form, therefore it's something to do with programming. It isn't. It's information, and this. I'm seeing this at the moment about research data preservation, just trying to get people to actually write down why they did things and for what purpose. It's half the value. But our tool, we don't create tools that make us do that. And we're just beginning to think about having things like digital assistants that actually prompt us, said, hey, you know what? You said you were going to do this and you haven't explained it yet. And that's maybe something we need to do. But certainly, I think if we want to have more and richer data, we're going to have to make more of an effort to be present in the process of its creation.
Yeah, I want to mention something I was going to say earlier and I forgot, but it's worth talking about. When I went to the Pink Floyd exhibit at the V&A. I don't know if anyone had a chance to see that. Frodo, did you go and see it?
I didn't, but my first ever published picture was of Roger Waters, so yeah.
Oh my God. So I'm going to say this. This speaks to what you're talking about environments. This is the only exhibition in my entire life that I've ever seen in which multimedia played a role, that the environment, all of the contextual elements were there. At the end of this long journey through the Pink Floyd development and evolution, you moved into this gigantic room that looked like an outside, like you're sitting outside, and you would sit on the floor like a rock concert. And they played 3 videos, rock concert videos, one from each major period. At the end, you had your digital match, or what's it called? You know how you would do the
Lighter, yes.
lighter. Thank you. I don't smoke, so I don't know the name of it. But it was, oh my God. It's like, oh, somebody really thought about this. So at the end of this, I went up to meet the curator. I was so flabbergasted and had a series of conversations with her, and the way she conceptualized this exhibition. And I thought it would blow the top off exhibitions in the future, and it didn't. There's still quiet environments where you look at a distance at an object instead of experiencing the context of it, which I think is a damn shame. Carl?
Yeah, so earlier we talked about not necessarily having to stick to existing affordances, paradigms, visuals, workflows, etc. when moving something into XR. And we talked about, well, we want to try to make some new paradigm, some new visual affordance, whatever it is. And I was wondering if we are designing those from a top-down perspective or a bottom-up perspective.
Well, since we're talking every Monday with all of you or doing testing to other people, I think it's kind of both. It's coming like this. And there's some good things about that, And there's some not so great things about that, right? It's easier when you have two PIs and one really super brilliant programmer working on a project together, right? And then doing some user testing along the way. But we're a gigantic team of people every Monday getting feedback, and it's had its moments of excitement, and it's had its moments of, oh my God, I can't believe I want to tear my hair out. So I think the answer is both in this project.
Because the source of the constraints will inform like which of those two approaches is generally going to be quicker or better solve that problem better. Because if you know the core individual pieces you're working with, but you don't know what exactly the end goal looks like or what you want it to do exactly, but you're constrained by either the resources or the tools that you have on hand, then you take a bottom-up approach. Whereas if you have a very clear, very defined final vision and the tools are subject to change or be swapped out or modified in how they're used, then you take a top-down approach. So a way to, an analogy to kind of split those two things apart is top-down design is building a Lego set and you have the instructions. You know what the box looks like, you know what the end goal is going to look like, and then here's all your pieces, follow the instructions and build it. And a bottom-up design is you don't have a box, you don't have a picture, you don't have any instructions. You just, these are the Lego bricks that you have, and now you're going to try to build a starship, whatever, with those pieces.
Let me mention something to you that's different though. We don't have to have anything. We have no constraints. We can make whatever we want. Sloan Foundation has given us total freedom. We do not have to have a product. This is not a research project. It's an experiment about what text can be in the virtual world. And that's different, right? I mean, if this is different than when KD Pharmacy Project, I knew what we're supposed to be building, right? It's different than the next, which didn't exist at all in the world, and I had to come up with it. I had imagined everything from categories to how the things were going to float on the screen. I was connecting it to theory. This doesn't have those constraints. This is a totally different project. And I think that's also what made us a little crazy because we had people working with us and, what's your time? What's your workflow? It's like, well, we don't need a lot of those things because we're not building a product. We're experimenting.
So if the constraints don't come from the organization, from the funding source, the constraints need to come from the PIs. And if the PIs don't want to put on constraints, then the constraints need to come from the technical folks by either this is what my knowledge and ability is, or these are the tools that I have access to. There need to be some clear constraints from somewhere so that everybody can be on the same page and that we avoid spending time or effort working on or discussing things that are outside of those constraints.
The way we've imagined it is I think the way I've imagined it is parameters instead of constraints. Because when I think it's constraints, I think that we're tied to something. And I have to say, I have to go to a meeting at 10, so I'm gonna have to leave in about 1 minute so I can have a bio break and some water. But yeah, Fro, did you want to jump in? You're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
Can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I would have thought you consider that a benefit, but thank you. Yeah, obviously everything Dene said, I agree, so I'm not going to repeat it. But on top of that is there are three things in the Sloan thing. One is dialogue, code, and metadata. So the really important thing is to experiment to figure out how things work and then write them up, including release the code. That is really, really important. And then ideally, the data should last. So on the metadata, visual meta all the way. That's how I feel. I'm very happy to, in a good way, arm wrestle with anyone to do it better. Brilliant. When it comes to the interactive constraint, though, Carl, I'm very glad you bring it up because it actually stresses me quite a lot. Because as Tom was saying, creativity requires constraints. And it's something creatively we've been going through the community and looking at. We have decent constraints now to a point, but absolutely agree that we should have a session in the community where Dene and I better present the constraints so we have something better to discuss around. But in terms of the creativity of the group, that's important, but also very, very boring. It is really, really important for everyone to try to think, invent on your own, right? So Carl, I saw the video you posted of your work for the library for the military. It's absolutely brilliant. I'm going to watch it with the sound on after this. There's nothing wrong with doing 100% proprietary software within this community. There's nothing wrong with going against every single thing we do, because that's what makes the dialogue bigger. So agreeing with you and also stretching it. Fabian, you have 30 seconds before Dene has to run, I think, or 10.
Super quick. For me, the top down, the top is like the constraint of having to do something in October, September symposium, and that academics who do want to do authoring will find this at least interesting. Not necessarily useful, but to me, that's the top down aspect. And the bottom up is indeed anybody in this group and even otherwise that gives potential ideas, code, file formats, whatever. So that's kind of the both ways. It was kind of I think it's a happy mesh mess. I think it's fruitful.
Great minds. It's great to have all these great minds, right? And harness it. And it's great to have these questions. Frodo, will I get the stuff in the chat? Because I didn't get a chance to answer it and I don't have time now. So I can't seem to download it. Would you make sure I get that?
Yes.
And then I'll write people individually for
yes.
to respond.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping that the summary of this will be richer this time. I've added some prompts to say, don't make it short.
And thank you so much, everybody, for letting me speak. I know this doesn't have everything to do with our text project, but the principles that I'm developing out of it, I think, are helpful.
Yes, and it really stretches what we're doing, Dene. So it was really wonderful timing. So thank you.
Thanks to all of you. Have a great President's Day.
Yes, great former colonies President's Day.
Doesn't feel like a holiday to me because I'm working all day. All right, bye.
Bye. Before you all run off in 3 minutes, this is on the last few points. The Apple Vision Pro has a series of 180 stereo videos, as I think most of you are aware. It really comes into our conversation regarding environment and context, because, and also Carl, this really addresses your question about constraints, because when you have, even with this normal camera, you have 2 lenses, so I can actually film stereo video, and I've been experimenting. It's not the highest quality or anything. But what becomes interesting as we experiment is what constraints fall out of it. For example, when you do stereo video, if you shoot at an odd angle, it's really uncomfortable to watch because you're always going to be watching it straight on. If you're watching something really close, it doesn't look like you're really close to someone or something. It looks like they're gigantic. The fact that you have a depth changes how the brain deals with it. Oh, okay. See you later, Tom. Very glad you're here. And please come back as often as you like. It's wonderful. Thank you so much. Not sure if you were saying anything other than bye, because you were...
Oh, no, I was saying I'm not running out. I was just pointing to note that I'm going to be late starting next week because I have a class until 10:30.
Oh, so, okay. Yeah, no, that's reality.
Just
yeah,
so you know.
Yeah.
I'll bring a hall pass.
Oh, yeah, cool. But also, Carl, the notion of, because, if I can read your face at all, the notion of constraints and lack of them is a bit stressful for you. It is actually quite stressful for me. Right now, over the last week, it has been absolutely tearing me apart. And working intimately with Dene and Fabienne is amazing. But because I'm a software developer by heart, designer, not coder, if something isn't if the pieces aren't fitting, it feels like my body is wrong, right? I'm sure you know exactly the feeling I'm talking about. So the key design issue that I'm wrestling with now, and if anyone wants to help, it would be bloody brilliant. That is, as Dene has been amazing with her academic perspective on this. Reading and writing is so similar. We all agree with this, right? We've been looking at reading and writing modes, library modes. It's basically rubbish, is my current feeling. So I'm thinking today as the notion of you're in a reading environment, you're doing the highlighting that Fabian has made possible, you're dragging things off to annotated bibliography, you're doing all these amazing things. Now, where the heck is your manuscript? And by manuscript, I just mean the thing you're writing before it's published, like a Word document kind of thing, right? Where the heck is it? And by that, I mean, what is the interaction through which it will be produced? It sounds like a nothing problem or a detail, but for me, it is everything, right? We have this fantastic wrist menu that Fabian has to toggle the environment. Last year, we had a brilliant hand menu, which we can use. We have all these things. We have our imagination. But until that is solved, at least for one iteration, and maybe we throw it away, to me, it feels really, things are off somehow, right? Just as a final thing on this for your imagination is I can imagine you pull it out like a magician out of your wrist, and then you have it. And it looks very much like that weird green PDF thing, right? It's a little kind of virtual tablet. So you do your stuff, you pull things from the reading into it. It's still a linear tablet. I think it is I don't mind paper in XR, provided it is part of the journey, because it's a really good anchoring point, but it shouldn't be everything. So you put things and you do this and you do whatever, and when you're done, you put it back in your wrist or equivalent. I'm not saying that's the interaction, but until we have that, it's going to be weird. See you later, Fabienne, and I hope you took notes because you have to implement all this.
I'll let you check the chat. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you on the weekend. Bye. What? No. What? He's gone. Right. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, one thing I find really handy is just having a little mini legal pad, not a full-size pad, but just one of those little, tiny little ones that can go in a little tiny little folio next to me while I'm working with the book, just so I can jot down the page numbers of things that I want to be able to get back to later on. So I'm thinking maybe an interaction if you're dealing with multi-page documents where you just like tap the document a couple times, and that would automatically cause a pointer to that point in the document to get added to a list done up visually to look like it's a little mini legal pad.
Yeah, I mean, the difference between a notepad and your manuscript is how you use it. So I find that very complementary to what I was saying. In wrapping up, Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on your question about where's the manuscript. I mean, I think it's at a tangent to the paper metaphor, and what your manuscript is rather depends on your design style. If you're used to writing, it's more about if you're used to writing long form, whether you imagine it as literally a rectangular sort of paper-like thing, or just effectively a long sequence of text, or whether you take a more modern approach, which is to write the bits you need and then assemble what you need at the point where you need to make if indeed you even need to make a long form output. We're massively trained in the former, so that guides our sort of perception of how things should be. I think the thing that fits better with what we're providing is to look at a more modular form of writing. It requires a slightly different mindset. It's not difficult to achieve. Lots of people do. It just, you need to let go of the sort of, the safety rail, the shallow end of the pool, swim out a bit and realize that actually our minds are remarkably good at producing all this associative stuff. So you write the bits you need, and then you can assemble them in the form you want. And it goes back to this point, you render what you need, you make the bits you need, and then you work out how to render it. That almost becomes a separate thing. At the moment, we're inculcated to use the thing where we do the whole thing soup to nuts at the same time. We write the thing start to finish, we style it all, we do all of that in one go, and it's actually remarkably hard work, and our tools aren't that good. And I think they will get less good the more we push into XR use.
Yeah, that's all well and good and important, but what does it mean, right? It really comes down to the implementation, and I agree with everything you said there in principle, but still in the XR space, we have to have a way where the this and the that exists, even in a virtual way. So I would really like to see more writing on this, or ideally sketching, because...
Well, just simply because I thought it would be self-evident. So let me try and just one more crack at explaining it to you, which is the point is that you have as many you can produce notes wherever you want. So the design we should perhaps be thinking of is the ability to have these notes and then think how we actually organize those, because that is an unsolved problem. I think it is more convenient to make the annotations or the bits of writing, which you could think of as a form of annotation. The challenge is how we organize those. But I don't think. I mean, I don't know a clearer way to say that. That
No, but
basically,
Mark,
instead of having
okay,
one bit
let
of
me,
paper that's a manuscript,
okay,
you have lots of notes.
okay, Mark, let me explain the problem. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to do so, even though we're over. Thank you guys for staying. The thing is, when you're sitting in a virtual or physical environment, you have a very limited workspace, right? As you know, you basically have a large monitor. Information to your side is not very convenient, right? Standing up is a bit different. We talked about memory palaces and so on. So no matter what, and Mark, I know you agree with every one of these things. I know I'm preaching to the choir. I'm just trying to get to a point. So the ability to hide and show things is really, really important, right? And I know we also agree strongly on that. So here's my point. If you have a lot of these either thoughts or annotated citations or whatever they might be, they do have to exist in some form, right? And if they are like a knowledge map or spatial hypertext, that's absolutely fine. But it's still the question of how do you then choose to draw a lasso around it and say this is a bound object I will now publish? And I'm not saying it's an intractable issue at all, right? And these are not annoying questions to ask you because I don't think there's an answer to it. I think there are. But I do think that at a certain point, especially for an academic style document, there needs to be a narrative. There needs to be a introduction. This is what I'm trying to say. Needs to be some kind of a conclusion and stuff in the middle. So when I'm saying it, I'm okay with a piece of paper as the binding mechanism, as I wrote in the messages up here, yeah, links provide a narrative. That's absolutely part of it, Mark. I agree with that, but you still have to display the links in space, right? And how we do that is a design issue. They can't not exist. Okay, why don't you speak? I'm not finished, but
Sorry,
I would
they
love
can
to hear what you have to
exist.
say.
Yeah. Sorry, I mean, the point being that so if we step back from the fixity of what we learned in our youth, that you start at the top left corner and write all the way down, you can have all these bits. What I take away from several decades of working in sort of knowledge tools is that it is perfectly possible to actually work in what seems to be a very fragmented sense. What you have to learn to develop is that sense of narrative. You provide the narrative. The narrative is not where you are on
Mark,
the page.
Mark,
the narrative is
Mark, I agree with all of this. I'm just asking, what will it look like? That's all I'm asking. I have no
the thing is, does it have to look like one thing? I mean, I think if I've learned anything from working that, let me just remember the point. The thing I've learned from that is it shouldn't probably look the same to everyone because that's not how you do it. The point is you will have objects. How you manifest them visually within the space is actually, I think, less important than you think because different people will want to show them different ways. That if you have the linkage between them, then you have the means to establish.
Mark, I think that is an absolutely kind of get out of jail card or whatever it is, because the only way visual information like text exists is visually, right? So how it is presented is crucial. The fact that, obviously I agree with this part, the fact that you, Peter, Carl and Tom and me may want to see it differently is absolutely acceptable and fine and important. It is in fact crucial. That was my last ACM paper. Completely agree. We still have to have one way that we ourselves define how we want to see it. Should it be entirely changeable? Of course. But if we just keep talking about the visual side isn't important, it can be changed, we're not designing, right? We got to design something and then we got to disagree with it or agree and keep going. And how this will look, you know, you and me in different ways have spent an enormous amount of time looking at this, especially lately. And when I actually get down doing the sketching for it should look like this or that, the reality of it becomes really, really complicated. Okay, let's see if that's if that's caught. Can you speak it as well, please?
Well, just one for Claude. In our glossary, we need to define C. I think Carl's touched on this as well. I mean, there is this thing that we all just have very vivid internal pictures when we use some of these words. And our pictures, our ideas are not invalid at all. But the likelihood that the five of us, for instance, here at the moment, we take any of these things, are seeing the same thing, are close to vanishing. And so one of the points, it seems pedantic to talk about the glossary. I think I used a different term, but we call it glossary now. That's fine. But the whole idea of it is to try and understand that even if it's not our own internal view, that when in the context of the sort of combine, we're saying something, that we actually do that. And it's hard because what it forces us to do is to do the extra step. So what we do is we describe something and we feel we've described it richly and
But Mark, that's why we need to
But in fact, we
illustrate it.
haven't, because no one else in the room is actually seeing what we're seeing.
But Mark, that is why I would really like to see visual examples of how you think this should be, right? Because, I go through this in different ways and I haven't shared as much as I should, but, just like a detail, Deanie prefers a gray background, as do you. I now agree, right? But we're going to start with some 3D model just so people can settle into the space. They can click a thing and it's gone. Fine, right? Once you have that, what are you actually showing? Are you showing a sentence? What are the bits and how do they appear? What kind of a font is it against a dark background? All of these things are really, really important to allow us to really talk it through. And when you talk about connections, of course, I completely agree with you. But what should the interaction be to select a knowledge object, to see more about it, or to see the connections? Because we don't have shift and control click and all of that in XR. So all of these things have to be completely invented by us for this. And Mark, you're really, really good at making us go and stretch our thinking. Look what's underneath. And that's what we're up against now. So that's why I would really love to see more sketches of, if someone has a notion of, you pretend you put on glasses and something, they're fantastic. Give it to us. Peter, and then Tom, and thank you.
Okay, I see a couple possibilities. One would be sort of a generalized Bezier curve in 3 dimensions going from the source of the link to the destination of the link. The other possibility would be to replicate some miniaturized iconic representation of the source next to the destination and vice versa without having any kind of a line drawn between them. So if I saw the 2 documents, I'd see the document 1 icon at the landing point in document 2 and the document 2 icon at the original other anchor point in document 1. Another possibility would be to pop up a little vector arrow pointing in the direction of where the destination is. So that, for instance, if the source document was in front of me and the target document was out behind me, I might see an arrow projecting towards me. It would essentially tell me, turn around. That's where you'll find the thing that I'm pointing at, because at that point in the space, or maybe way up to your left, is where you're going to find it. So the arrow pointing in the direction in 3 space of where to look to find the destination, then the destination itself might be blinking or highlighted in some manner. And that might be easier than having threads drawn in full 3D.
Thank you, Peter. Tom?
Well, I think one thing we've got to kind of get away from this fixed ontology idea of this is paper, these, this is an object, this is this kind of object, this is that kind of object. To me, I think the most interesting thing is zooming in and out on information and looking at it in different ways. For instance, I put this background up just a minute ago. I asked Dolly to do a representation of what Ted Nelson's Xanadu project might look like in reality. And, it's fun to get Dolly to do these abstract ideas, but it does make you think about, okay, how do we do this? How do we preserve perspective? I think that's the tough thing. How do you preserve perspective without dictating perspective? And that's the line you have to sort of traverse, in the sense of it's got to make sense at some level, but I also want to be able to take that idea and make it mine in a different way and combine it and uncombine, mash it together with different ideas, take it apart again, like I was saying earlier with Picasso. Take that painting apart and say, okay, these are all the different threads that contributed to the creation of that painting. And that's the kind of thing I want to be able to do in a broader sense with just about any idea, papers, books, visual artifacts, or whatever. So the having that ability to pull in and out, I think, and again, this is where I think AI comes into play because it can do this kind of crunching for us in a much more dynamic way, and we don't have to hard code all of this off the bat. You can have a beginner mode if you like, but I don't want to be limited by that box of what you think is necessarily the best way to look at things, which may be a great way. And I want to understand your perspective, but I also want to be able to take that and play with that too, and understand that that's a constraint that you're putting on it, and for good reason. I'm not saying that's a dumb idea. I'm saying you have reasons for that constraint, but I also want to be able to explore other, constraints, take those off and push in and out with that. So it's a tough technical challenge. I won't lie about that.
So that's very much core at what we've been talking about here for quite a while. We want to have the underlying data accessible to whatever system you want to interact with it, 100%. One of the design issues we come up against also is that me personally, I don't want to create CD-ROMs. Even though I love Bob Stein, he's a close friend. When he did Voyager and books on CD-ROM DVD, that was what we had at the time, right? To me,
Right.
that's a ghetto. I can't think of a better word. It is just not what we want today. So I don't want to build a VR environment that is completely custom. You go in and you're in a garden and it's all custom. That's great. Many should be able to do that. For me, it's really, really important that a reader can access whatever you have published in a familiar way, flexibly, seeing, as you said, your view and impose their own view on it, which is why we come down to the underlying metadata and so on. This is why we talk about components in this system, and we're trying to separate. There are some components that are known, meaning it's reasonable for a system to extract them, such as the reference section. That is one list of known data. You should be able to view that as just a list on a timeline, on a citation tree, whatever the heck you want, depending on your system. But you should be able to do it while you're reading 5 other documents at the same time. So that's the kind of constraint of the author taking too much liberty of display, as I think you're also arguing against. And the only way we can allow you as a reader the freedom is to make sure that all of this is understood by the system as much as possible, which is the whole point of a third of the Sloan project, which is the visual meta approach. And the visual meta was my PhD, very much helped by my colleague Mark Anderson. All it is if something's important, write it down. And write it down accessibly and clearly. The initial version of visual meta is a PDF that has an appendix. In the appendix, it says, using BibTeX formatting, this is what this document cites, so the system can instantly take that out. This is how to cite the document, plus things like headings and so on, which isn't really LaTeX or BibTeX, but it's close enough that it's parsable. Now we're moving into JSON because that is more appropriate to what we're doing. But the whole idea is, when I started my PhD process, to download a PDF, and the PDF didn't even know when it was published, was absolutely mind-boggling to me. So we got to make sure that all our components know what they are. And finally, after this massive rant, part of the design problem I'm having, and the reason I don't mind having a virtual piece of paper notebook thing as the main thing, is there are so many of these additional bits that we can take real value on. For instance, if you want to add a knowledge graph, you probably want to do that in a knowledge graph space where you can really focus on that. And you should be able to combine that with the thread of a basic document in a way. Now, finally, when I said in the chat here that the icon approach is what we're trying to do, for me, a PDF with visual meta, the entire PDF is the icon. The data should be explained at the back of it. It's just that if you're allowed to author everything, like imagine in Photoshop or a 3D thing, you can build anything you like, but the skill level to deal with the with anything becomes really high. So I think part of our job is to develop the right kind of constraints that help creativity. And it's really important that we argue over what they should be, because we certainly don't agree on that, which is good. Thank you for that. And Peter, please, and then we need to wind down in a minute.
Okay, one possible affordance is a representation of the overall space. Back when we had the VR lab at Syracuse University down in the basement at Heroy, one of the things that I came up with was drawing a miniature representation of the volume that was in the overall experience. And that would basically be sort of like just like the glowing outline of a cube. And you would be the dead center of the cube, and that would represent you. Then, if we wanted to indicate where something was that was of interest to you, that would be a bright point in the cube relative to where you were at the center of the cube. So, by looking into this little miniature, basically a map of the overall volume inside the volume in miniature, it would show you exactly there. Ah, there's something up behind my left shoulder that I couldn't otherwise see, or there cluster of things up in front and to my right, and that would be represented in the little volume. So you'd be able to orient yourself even as you're moving around. Maybe we could have something like that mounted on your wrist, showing you the overall space that we're in our VR environment, so that you'd hold your wrist up, you'd see the little cube, and you'd immediately be able to orient for things that are out of sight or even occluded behind other things that in the full environment might be a solid wall, but in the map orientation, you'd just basically be looking at a wireframe of the world you're in, and you'd see the possible points of interest highlighted. And maybe we could even get it so that you could pinch that inside the cube on your wrist in order to teleport to that location. The other thing I really love how you were saying, Frode, about having the document say what it is, and I'm actually getting into this habit of starting things off to have the very first sentence in a document being "this is," and then the name of whatever kind of a parsable format it might be that the following data is. That's why I'd either say this is visual meta or visual meta follows with a colon, and then right away the very first thing is plain ordinary text that any human can understand, telling you what the language is that everything after that is going to be, until it sees another possibly nested one telling it, okay, now bibtech follows. And then in the middle of the bibtech, it might be, okay, actual tech markup follows because we're dealing with some exotic name in a non-Indo-European language that's dependent upon exotic glyphs, and we're going to represent them as Unicode code points spelled out as LaTeX commands. But everything really does need to say what format it's in whenever you hit a format boundary, even though the format boundaries can be nested. Okay, that's all I have for this week.
No, that's brilliant, Peter. Do you guys have another 3 minutes? Because there is something I can show on this.
I've got a.
Yeah, well, you've seen it anyway, Mark.
Okay. Sorry, I've got a hard stop, but good to see you all.
Yep. Bye, Mark.
Good to see you, Mark. Right, so this is author. These are some new things that relates to exactly what was discussed. For instance, here's my journal. I try to write a little bit every day. It's useful. And the new thing is that you can actually link to other documents, which I don't understand why all Mac things cannot. So I just do Command-Shift-D and go into author, and here is, for instance, what to author. And click, and that's it. It's a normal link. So it happened to be this one. I'm going to close this. If I click on it now, there it is, right? That is actually, thank you. It is phenomenally useful, and it's extremely low tech. Now, if I go into the map view of this, where we have all kinds of fun things, if I now do the same thing, I add a link to a document or Command-Shift-D here, it's different. So I click connect, and I go to what to author, and I then open it. This is not something everybody has to do, but I do summarize. So that's a ChatGPT AI summarize, right? It's running a bit slow. Okay, it's not super slow. So it's based on my preferred prompt that is saved. Everybody could have their difference. Close it, paste it in here. So now, where did I go? Sorry, you guys are obscuring a little bit. Oh yeah, here it is. What to author, right? So it means that I can see it in context if I want to, because all the definition text that is bold is a link to everything else on the screen, right? So this is what you're talking about, Tom. You want to know where you're going. So the reason you here have So now I can just hit the enter key and here it is. So it really is the question of the boundary condition, because clicking on a link is actually cognitively heavy lifting. On the web, there are a lot of links to research that isn't clicked on. So how can you make yourself click on your own links to organize your own documents is not straightforward.
And as I said in the chat earlier, links are opaque. Unless you program them, you don't know where they go. So
Yep.
there's no line like this. I love this, by the way.
Thank you. The links are opaque. That is a very good line. So in XR, we have further affordances than what we have here, but I am experimenting based on what we can do at least here. Now, by the way, if I just do, I'm going to do define a word like, okay, define author. So if I do this, it's tagged just as a concept. If I now click on reference, I can now choose which reference that I'm talking about to add to that. You see this bottom bit, but that's not what I want. If I click on document, it goes into what you saw earlier. So it's a way of being able to choose what you show, because it used to be that people wouldn't play with their own metadata much. And then something wonderful happened. Facebook, back in the day with images, people would tag their friends. Right. I think that was a monumental thing in people understanding that adding metadata for yourself is actually fun and useful. So I'm hoping that in our extended environments, we can provide the affordances so it feels fun and useful, not a chore.
Yeah, and not time consuming.
Yes.
That's the key.
Exactly. So that's why the prompt that you saw for the summary is trying to extract the right kind of keywords. But of course, I had to manually do it. We're trying to get it automated. We'll see how we can get. Anyway, thank you for today.
I also don't want to author my own metadata. That's the other problem, is that, am I doing it right? I mean, am I using the same tag that you are? And that sort of thing drives me nuts, because, guessing that when I tag blogs and stuff like that drives me crazy.
Yeah. Well, the way we've approached it is, so we have these AI prompts that are saved, right? If you click on edit questions, let's say the summarize one, you can edit that prompt yourself. So that could be shared in a community, like Peter sends you the prompt he uses. So you could call it the FOT summarize, for instance. But what is also very important, and this is also new, not available yet, if you click on user, you can write who you are and what field you're interested in. That gets appended onto your prompt when it's sent to ChatGPT.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, you convinced me. I need to play with this.
I would be honored to hear your perspective. Please pay for it, and I will pay you back with coffee, because it's always nice to have the stats.
Oh, yeah, no problem. I may not have $3,500 for a Vision Pro, but I think I can manage a piece of software.
Yeah, excellent. It's kind of interesting. We did do author for the Vision Pro, and it's absolutely awful. And I can't remove it from the App Store, because then I have to move everything, which is weird. But we can talk about it some other day. But it's just a big chunky thing in front of you, and it's like, how does this help? To do the virtual screen is actually better. So I'm thinking maybe what we need to do together is to build author for the Vision Pro as purely the map, and that's it. So that'll be a challenge, and I'm sure Peter has a lot of ideas. Peter, your mind mapping and memory palace thing frequently comes up in my mind. We have to figure out how to do it.
Are you aware, just real quick, are you aware of Sun's Wonderland project from like 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago now, probably? It was an attempt to create an internalized, and I was looking for the video on this a little while ago, but it was an attempt to create a locally hosted version of Second Life, essentially. But one of the really cool things they had in their demo video was people walking into a music library as a three-dimensional object around them, and then being able to pluck and connect different music albums and stuff with each other. And that completely lit up my mind at the time. And I was going, this is what I want. This is what I want the virtual environments to do. And of course, they kind of faded off into nothingness. And Second Life also had its has gone into a stasis at some level, but I know a lot of people still use it. But in any case, I always thought that was, and that's what I keep thinking about as I'm looking at what you're working on too.
I will
So,
look at that. I didn't know about that, so thank you. And thank you, Peter, for the other link. I mean,
yeah.
Starfire, a lot of those are absolutely mesmerizing. I really do find that what we're doing now is really, really important time-wise,
Hmm.
history-wise. And we have to just stay open and properly open because every once in a while I'll take something exported with visual meta, put it in, and I'll ask it what metadata it can find. It finds everything flawlessly, right? We, we,
Hmm.
we need to be able to
There you go.
change things. And yeah, I'm going to click on both of those links. Also, you both know that sorry, I just clicked on those links. The summary of this will be up probably by tomorrow on our
Hmm.
website. So feel free to go. If you feel you are misrepresented or if there's something you want to add, feel free. It's a big prompt based, but if you want to add something, I'll just put in brackets, manually add it later. It's absolutely fine.
Yep. I think some of this stuff is in the virtual filing cabinet.
Indeed.
Yeah. All right. Well, I got to run now too. All right.
Yep,
Okay.
me too.
It's been great, and I'll
Great
see you
session.
next week.
Yeah, look forward.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye bye.